Hello there, it's Juliana Michaels and welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm sharing another card I made using some of the new Tim Holtz Sizzix dies and embossing folders. I'm using a combination of distress products, including distress inks, distress oxides, and distress paints to create an industrial vibe on both the background and the die cuts. As always, I encourage you to shop your stash and see if you already have something similar that you can use. However, if you're interested in any of the products I'm using, you can find the supply list with links in the description box below. Click on the word more to see more. When you shop through those links, you're supporting me at no extra cost to you, and I really appreciate that so very much. So for this card, I'm going to be working with some of the new Tim Holtz Sizzix dies that were just released in March. If you would like a little bit more of an overview of some of the dies, make sure you check out my previous video where I show you the entire release and the embossing folders, and just kind of give you a little more of a look at all the new products if you're interested. For this one, I'm going to be working with the Vault Industrial, Vault Edges, and then an oldie but a goodie, one of my favorites, the Gentleman die set. And then the embossing folder I'm working with is part of the new release, and this is called Vault Gears, and it's a multi-dimensional embossing folder, so it gives you a little bit more depth and dimension than a traditional embossing folder, but a little bit less than a 3D embossing folder. But it's again, if you'd like to know a little bit more about these, make sure you check out that previous video. So the papers I'm going to be working with are Distress Watercolor cardstock, and then Scrapbook.com's mixed media paper in this black. And the inks and mediums I'm going to be using, I'm going to use Salvaged Patina Distress Oxide ink, and then I'm also going to be using Salvaged Patina Distress ink, Distress ink in Hickory Smoke and Lost Shadow. And then something that I don't normally use very often are distress paints, and I'm going to be working with Evergreen Bough, Ground Espresso, and Cracked Pistachio. And then you will also need a small brayer of some sort. All right, so let's get into it. First things first, I embossed the watercolor cardstock on the smooth side using the Vault Gears 3D embossing folder. And now I'm going to do some work with some various inks here. So I've got the Salvaged Patina, Lost Shadow, and Hickory Smoke in regular distress ink, and then I'm going to be using the Oxide ink and the Salvaged Patina as well. But first off, I'm going to do some ink smushing with the Salvaged Patina. So I'm going to smush this onto my craft mat here, get a good amount of it down, and spritz that with some water. And then I'm going to dip that embossed paper into the ink. And yes, you could do this before you emboss the paper if you like, but sometimes working with the inks after you've embossed it, the ink kind of does different things on the paper because of the embossed pattern that's there. So I kind of like that effect sometimes. And here I'm just going to add a little bit more of this in a few spots where I'd like it to be. Kind of not filling it in totally, but here and there. And then from here, I'm just going to dry this with my heat tool. Okay, and now I'm going to repeat that process and ink smush with some of the Lost Shadow. And again, just kind of ink smushing it here and there. Get a little more. Sometimes just doing your finger is good too. And if you feel like you need a little more ink, you can always add some more to this as well. Like I said, finger always helps as well. And then we'll just give that a dry. And as you can see, that ink smushing, when you do that on the already embossed paper, the ink kind of tends to pool and gather around where that embossed design is. And I don't know, I just really like how that looks versus ink smushing and then embossing. All right, so now we're going to take our Distress Hickory Smoke ink pad and we're going to rub it over the surface of our paper. Now, if your paper is a little bit warped, which is going to happen when you're working with, you know, paper and water, you can just kind of bend it and kind of straighten it back out a little bit if you need to. It will flatten down once you adhere it to your background, so I never really worry about the warping too much. And now you're just going to gently lay that on there and then just lightly rub it over the surface of the raised pattern. And let's start off light. You can always add more, but you can't take it off once it's there. And then just keep rubbing that over the surfaces here. And you'll see, like, some areas are just a teeny bit higher than others. If your ink pad's a little on the dry side, which I kind of suspect this one might be, you might have to push a little bit harder. But now I'm kind of taking the corner of that ink pad and kind of getting it down on there a little bit more, so I get a little darker ink on these raised areas. And again, just kind of play around with how much pressure you need. Like I said, you can always add more ink. You can't take it off once it's there. So if your ink pad's really juicy, it's going to probably transfer that ink over a lot faster than what you're seeing here. And if you do get more ink on here, like I've got some down in some of these areas that maybe I didn't want it, it's not the end of the world. Don't worry about it. We're going for grungy. It's going to be just fine. All right, so now we've got that done. And now what I want you to make sure you do is you dry that ink. You want to use your heat tool or let it set and dry, but you definitely want to dry the ink before you go on to the next step. And the reason you want to dry that is when you're working with these water reactive inks, whether it's the oxides or the regular distress inks, when they're wet and you add them together, they're just going to blend. If you dry them in between, the colors will layer and just give you a completely different look. So then once this is dry, now we're going to take that oxide ink. So the oxide inks are a combination of pigment and dye ink, where the distress inks are dye ink only. And the combination of that pigment and dye that's in these oxides makes them a little more opaque and gives you a little bit more coverage. And so now this is dry. You're going to take that ink pad and you're going to just lightly rub it. And this time I really want you to go light. Barely touching it down and just kind of wiping. And so you're getting those like streaks of the ink here and there across the background. And it just really, I think, adds like a really cool, so I'm in some areas I'm kind of like tilting it, so I'm just getting a little bit more of the edge. But again, just barely touching it down and then wiping it across the surface. And it just gives some cool texture and interest with those kind of streaks in there that I feel like really adds to kind of that industrial vibe here. So then from here, you just want to let this dry, and then you can trim it down to size if you want to layer it, which is what I'll be doing. So then I'm also going to just take a little bit of Scorched Timber Distress ink and an ink blending tool, and I'm just going to ink around the edges here a little bit, just to give it a little bit more of a grungy, distressed feel. And again, you can add as little or as much of that as you want. I'm just really kind of getting the edges though. But if you want it a little darker, you can get it down kind of more into the middle. The design. And so there is a look at the finished background that we created. All right, so now I've got my scrapbook.com mixed media paper that I'm going to be working with, and I'm going to be using my distress paints and the brayer. So the first color I'm going to use is Ground Espresso, and if you don't have the distress paints, you can also use regular acrylic paint. You don't have to use the distress paints. And just putting a little bit here on my craft mat, and I'm going to take my brayer and just roll it through the paint and kind of get it coated on my brayer there, but then kind of trying to get some of it off so there's not tons of it on here. And then I'm just going to very lightly, you're not pushing down hard, very lightly rolling it over the surface. And you see how that, just that little bit of paint then is getting transferred onto my paper. And then I'm going to just go different directions with it. And just kind of take what I get with it. But the big key is just to go in one direction, whether it's forward or backward, and kind of keep it moving and adding that paint. And it just gives you this really cool textural effect because you're lightly rolling it on and you're not letting the roller kind of like roll flat across the paper. So now to show you another little bit of a combination you can do, I'm going to add some Evergreen Bough distress paint here and kind of do that same thing with the brayer. Kind of run it through the paint, kind of get it on the roller. And you just kind of keep going until you get it rolling through there. Now this will work even better on like a silicone craft mat. However, I don't like to use those because of Ziva with the dog hair, that it sticks, when it gets on there, sticks to those, and it's really just kind of a pain to clean off. So that's why I'm working on this kind of craft mat. But if you have a silicone one, you could use that as well. Now you're going to do that same thing. You're just going to roll it across the paper, kind of going in different directions, letting it kind of skip and do its thing here. And yeah, you just kind of never know what you're going to get with this. Like sometimes you get more paint in a spot than you want, and but yeah, so there's that Evergreen Bough. And then if you want to add in a little bit of brown, so you can start mixing colors a little bit here. Add in a little bit of the brown, that Ground Espresso, and I still have some water on my craft mat here, so that I think is part of what is keeping this from rolling. So I'm going to dry some of that up here. Let's add some more paint. There we go. And I don't want a lot of paint, especially not the brown, because I want to kind of keep that Evergreen Bough going. So now we're just going to lightly, again, super lightly. I'm barely touching this down, barely touching it down. It's just going to be very subtle hints of that brown here and there. So see if you can kind of see that. So it's just subtle hints of it. All right. So now we're going to let that dry, and we're going to then we'll add our final layer here. Now, if you want, you can do your die cutting before you do the painting. I just thought I would kind of show you kind of on a little bit larger panels what you can get with this. So from here, I'm going to be using that Gentleman die set to die cut the shape that I'll be using here. And so, you can just, die cut that out if you want, or you can go ahead and do this next step, or you could have die cut this first and then have done this brayering technique. So now I'm going to add some of the cracked pistachio. I'm just gonna, a little drop there, and then take my brayer and get some of that spread across my craft mat here and across onto the brayer. And now I'm just gonna apply that as another layer here on this background. And I'm also going to do some of the ink smushing with this. So instead of ink smushing though, we're now doing paint smushing. And if you want more of that, you know, just add some more paint to your craft mat. Take that brayer, just kind of spread it out so it's not too much in one spot. And then smush your paper into there. And it just really picks up that, you know, just some cool texture and interest, I think. There we are. And then when it comes to cleaning up the paint, if you're working on a craft mat, like a non-stick craft mat or silicone mat, just add a little water, take a paper towel, and even if the paint's dry, it's just going to wipe right off of there. And then as for the brayer, you can kind of do the same thing, just use some water and a towel, or you can take the brayer to the sink and clean it off there. So here is a look at the finished card, and I added the background panel that we created to just a piece of black cardstock. And then I die cut the panel that we created with the ground espresso paint on the black and use that to cut the different pipe pieces. And then I just used some plain black cardstock to cut the little accent pieces. I used the same black cardstock to create the sentiment, so I just die cut the letters to spell out happy, and I die cut them 3 times and adhered them together just to give that a little bit more dimension and interest there. And then I die cut the gentleman from that piece of paper that we made with the evergreen bough, ground espresso, and salvaged patina, and then just adhered that to the card to finish it off. Well, I hope you enjoyed seeing how this card came together using some of the new dies and embossing folders from Tim Holtz and Sizzix. Until next time, stay crafty, my friend. If you're interested in learning more about working with embossing folders, make sure you check out my most recent class, Stretch Your Embossing Folders. This class is designed for anyone who's interested in learning more about using embossing folders in mixed media. Throughout the class, you'll learn 4 ways to combine embossing folders with inks, sprays, paste, wax, and paint to create a variety of unique effects. Each technique is broken down into easy-to-follow steps to create a stunning background. Check out the link in my description box to learn more. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you can join me on a more regular basis. Hit the like if you enjoyed this video. And if you want to join me on my other social media platforms, you can find the links to those in the description box below. Also, feel free to leave me a comment if you have any questions or if there's something you'd love to share with me and our community. I'll see you in the comments below and in the next video. Until next time, stay crafty, my friend.